Kia ora, bula, kia rana, talofa, malaoelele, and welcome to Palagi and a Piece in East Pod. My name's Glenn Murphy. I'm here on Waiheke Island in Aotearoa. And Dave, it's great to be here for another week, telling wonderful stories about business in the Pacific.
Yes, Māori, Glenn, Ali, hello, all geta. David Dewar here, dialing in from Rarotonga, Cook Islands. But as many of our long-term listeners will be aware, previously based in Suva, Fiji, Glenn and I have been working together across the Pacific to help New Zealand, Australian and Pacific businesses understand and operate effectively in this region. And it's fantastic to be doing so again through this weekly podcast.
And Dave, you'll see that I am in my Tongan attire today. So last week we talked about the creative enterprises that we've been working with. So just a big shout out to Losalia Aliva, who gifted me this shirt at the end of the course we were doing. And Losalia runs the Fiunu Kola Global Academy of Tongan Arts in Auckland. And so a big shout out to Losalia and a big thank you.
Looking at the sizing, it's probably a Tongan medium, which you're getting a little bit lost in there, but some piece of artistry.
So, hey Dave, I guess the other couple of things that happened this week for me is a couple of farewells. We during the day job in the Auckland office of NZTE, we had a farewell for Mr. Pete Crisp, our CEO, who's heading off to be the CEO of Department of Conservation. So it was a very fond farewell for Pete. And actually that same day, we also had a farewell for a very good friend of mine, Julie Chadwick, who is one of our corporate communications people. So Julie's been a friend of mine since university days, so it was sad to see her go, but it's been very cool to work with her over the last few years. And for anybody listening who wants a really, really top-notch corporate communications person, I know Julie is looking for opportunities at the moment, so give me a shout.
Yeah, what a legend. Well, Julie is, of course, a long-time friend of this podcast and of mine as well. And, we've really enjoyed working with Julie over the years. And, of course, she's been very helpful in terms of feedback in our day jobs and also in this endeavour. So, no, Julie, wishing her all the best and absolutely endorse what you say, Glenn. She's an absolute legend.
And, Dave, looking at what you're wearing, you, of course, have your Aussie barbecue prawn and kangaroo shirt back on, so that must tell me that the Australian team is playing and that you're hosting some people to watch the game.
That's right, Glenn. Yeah, it's Aussie again for me today. We have, as we speak, Australia is playing Egypt. As we speak, I think the score's currently tied at 1-1, so very exciting game so far. So yeah, we'll see what happens.
Well,
there.
this is one of those occasions where even as a Kiwi, I'm supporting Aussie. So let's hope they can pull it off and beat Egypt.
A lot of other stuff happened this week, Glenn. One of the things I've been thinking about is actually the food scene, because the news, of course, this week that New Zealand got its inaugural Michelin stars. And one of those stars went to a restaurant in Auckland called Tala, which of course is Samoan, a Samoan chef. So Henry Onesimo. And really, really cool to see, not just New Zealand getting its first bunch of Michelin stars, and including a couple on Waiheke Island. So I'm sure you're very familiar with those establishments. But to see the first proper Pacific Michelin star as well, super cool to see that a restaurant that focuses very specifically on Pacific cuisine and training Pacific chefs and all of that get recognised for its achievement.
I think next time you're in Auckland, Dave, we're going to have to go and sample it, because I haven't been to Tala, so it's a great shout out and I'd love to go.
100%, yeah, I'm keen.
And what else is happening in your week? Have you still been pig wrangling? Did the pig manage to get tied up in the end?
No. Sadly, Miss Piggy or Stardust, as I think one of our neighbours nicknamed her, one of the daughters called her, has disappeared. So we're all assuming that she's gone off to a better home somewhere. Yeah, we no longer have the pig living in the front garden, which is a positive for me.
Excellent.
Other than that, of course, it's been quite unseasonably cold here. Got all the way down to about sort of 17, 18 degrees yesterday in Rarotonga. So, jackets were out, hoodies have been on, and I know everyone listening in New Zealand is going to be, deeply sympathetic to that. But it really is quite unusual, I have to say. Last couple of days is certainly the coldest I've ever been in the Pacific, and a lot of people remarking the same, that weather's a bit different this year.
Well, Dave, the Talanoa we have this week is with Matt Finlay from Solomon Airlines, and it's timely because I think you were saying before we started recording that this week saw their inaugural flight to Christchurch.
That's right, Glenn. Yeah, so we've had aviation's obviously been a big theme of the conversations that we've had here. It's a critical enabler, not just of the tourism industry, but also, basic infrastructure in and around islands. And many of our listeners will probably remember that fantastic discussion we had with Sir Ewan Smith, who's the managing director of Air Rarotonga, and we caught up with him several months ago now. But unlike Air Rarotonga, Solomon Airlines, of course, operates not just a domestic connection, but also is a big international one as well. And Air Rarotonga, I should say, does have an international connection between Tahiti and Cook Islands, but Solomon Airlines operates two jets, and it was fascinating, I think, to talk to Matt Finlay about just the economics of running a larger airline and how you balance those two critical things that you have to deliver, that community service obligation to service, I think he told us it was 1,000 islands in Solomon, of which there's sort of 39, 40 odd airfields, but also with the revenue generating part of the business, which is, of course, the international connections, and just launched this week as a service from Christchurch to Solomon Islands via Vanuatu. So Solomon Airlines would have had its jet in at Christchurch Airport this week. The plane spotters would have been out in force looking at that one, and that's an inaugural new service taking tourists out of the South Island and up to Port Vila initially, and then potentially on from there to Honiara and Solomon Islands. So anyone in the South Island looking for a winter getaway to warmer climes could certainly check that one out. I highly recommend both of those destinations as a touristic experience, and it was great to talk to Matthew about that.
Yeah, well, Dave, I think it is timely, so let's go into that Talanoa with Matt.
For those who have been listening into our podcast over the past few months, you'll know that we talk quite a lot about the importance of two things in the region, one of which being tourism and the other of which being connectivity. Central to both of those things in a region that's separated by thousands of miles of water is, of course, air connectivity and air transport. And we've had some great conversations over the past few months with some of the leaders in the aviation industry, and particularly Sir Ewan Smith, the managing director of Air Rarotonga, and learning about how his airline operates within the Cook Islands context. It's fantastic to be joined today by another leader within the aviation industry in the Pacific, and that is Matthew Finlay. Now, Matthew is a very experienced aviation executive, and we'll get him to tell his own story in a minute, but he is just over, I think, 100 days into the role as the chief executive of Solomon Airlines. And I'm not just blowing smoke up Matthew when I say this, it's one of my favourite airlines. For the benefit of our audience, what we usually like to do is get our guests to lead in just by telling us a little bit about themselves. And so could you tell us a bit about the Matthew Finlay story and how it is that you've come to be running this airline in Honiara, Solomon Islands?
Thanks, Dave, and good to see you too. And hi, Glenn. Good to meet you. Yeah, and look, to all your listeners and watchers, kia ora. I am a Kiwi, also a Brit, and also an Australian. I'm now in Honiara, living here. I do travel back to Australia to see the family on a regular basis, but aviation has been something that I've fallen into, really. I started with a semester at university, and at the end of that semester, or year I should say, I was sort of tasked with getting a job to pay for the following year. And no word of a lie, I took the yellow pages and I opened it up and I scrolled down the list. I went to Air New Zealand.
Started at 8.
Yeah, I did. I looked at Air New Zealand and went, no. And then I went down further, Auckland Airport. They could be interesting. I wrote one letter. I didn't go to BP or, whatever was in the index with C or D or E. I wrote one letter to Auckland Airport and I said, I'd like a job for the Christmas holidays. And they wrote back saying, sure, come in for an interview. And the next thing is I'm managing a team of 4 high school students, looking after the escalators in the terminal redevelopment at the time. And the one job the kids had to do was make sure that the kids that were in the local community in Mangere were coming out to the airport and seeing all this development, seeing family off and that sort of thing. And they'd often get their fingers, unfortunately, caught in the escalators because they loved playing on them. And so our job was to sort of shoo them away to make sure they didn't play there. And that was the one job that I did. And that's sort of what got me involved in aviation. And from there, every sort of holidays, I had a job of some sort or another. And as my degree progressed, it became more managerial in sense of looking at ways the airport could improve itself. And of course, it was on a journey towards reconstruction at that stage, but then ultimately being listed within that same decade. And that's how I sort of fell into aviation, really.
Just thinking for our younger listeners, we should explain that the yellow pages are were a physical book with yellow paper that listed all the phone numbers of businesses in the community.
So, yeah, that's right. Back in the old days, we had these, books. We didn't have, internet or anything like that. So you had to literally look through a book to find companies and other details. And the Asian financial crisis was, of course, a big thing back then, back in the mid-90s. And so the Auckland Airport weren't taking on any recruits or new staff. And so I went and joined ANZ Bank as a graduate employee. Absolutely hated it. It was just mind-numbingly boring. And so I was there for 6 months, and every month through those 6 months, I would ring up Auckland Airport and say, how about a job? And so one day they said, "Oh, what do you know about property?" And I just said, "What do you need me to know?" And I went in for the interview, and at the end of the job, I said, "When can I start?" And they said, "Well, we haven't offered you the job." And I said, "Oh, okay. Well, can you let me know when I can start?" And so that's how I started, really. And I started in the property team, learning how to write leases for Singapore Airlines and other carriers and that sort of thing. So all up about 5 or 6 years, and then my fiance at the time, but wife, eventually, we decided to do our overseas experience and go to London. Before I got there, of course, I'd opened the yellow pages and sort of done some research on which companies.
Bigger yellow pages over there.
Did you get past A in this,
I
New Zealand, ANZ Bank?
I wrote 4 letters, and all 4 of them wanted to interview me. And eventually I took a job with a company simply because the pedigree of the company that I'd worked for, Auckland Airport, they'd just been listed. Every year they'd delivered double-digit profit growth for the 3 or 4 years that I'd been there since listing. The credibility of having that behind me was really important. And so the company I ended up working for, they hired me on the basis of the company that I was previously employed by. And so I joined this company called TBI, PLC, listed on the London Stock Exchange. They had airport assets in London, Belfast, Cardiff, so England, Wales, Ireland, Northern Ireland, Sweden, North America, even Australia. And so that gave me a taste of a really broad sort of portfolio of airports, provided me with the exposure to a multitude of different cultures and people and places that we had to operate in. And my job, more or less, was to try and find commercial revenues that were hidden or could be unlocked for the benefit of the company. Then 9/11 happened, and this is the challenges with aviation, right? There's these spikes in challenges that occur. Anyway, I moved on from there to a management consultancy, working in places like Stansted and Gatwick and Southampton. So again, more airports, managing capital expenditure by those airports. And of course, capital expenditure for airports is a huge sort of investment and not always a guarantee of getting a return. That's generally how airports make their money, right? They sink assets into the ground and or build it up from the ground, and they hope that the passenger numbers that keep coming through, can pay for that. And then I came back to Auckland Airport for another 5 years.
I would imagine for them to come back to them with all that enhanced experience.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I do find that within aviation, even though it's a global industry and many people know each other, there's sometimes the mistake of trying to reinvent the wheel. I came to the ASPA conference, the Association of South Pacific Airlines conference in Rarotonga, Dave. That's where we met. And one challenge that we had is that we had seafood that was being transported in our planes, often leaking. And of course, I talked to a couple of airlines there, and they said, "Oh yeah, we've solved that with plastic bags, and just simple plastic bags. These are heavy-duty plastic bags, right? So these plastic bags that these 2 airlines that I've spoke to have had them purposely made. But this is the benefit of not reinventing the wheel, right? You're having contacts and networks that you can rely on to sort of give you advice. And so when I did come back to Auckland Airport, I did come with a lot of that experience. And that seems to be a more global trend these days. People do move between different airport companies and airlines, and they do bring lots of experience and ideas about how to approach things.
actually, if seafood is leaking on a plane, that's actually a big problem, right? and
Massive. Yeah. As soon as you have water touch metal, of course, it's corrosive. And in this environment, it's significantly corrosive with sea salt and, and the marine environment that we travel over. A 10-cent robust plastic bag is better than a $10,000 repair. I spent those 5 years at Auckland Airport again as a second time, and then came back to, was taken to Christchurch Airport. And so in Christchurch, I had a role where I was talking to a lot of airlines to encourage growth into the region after the devastating earthquakes in 2010, 2011. And then after 5 years, left there and went to Newcastle Airport in Australia, just north of Sydney. They were keen on my pedigree simply because of a growth strategy that they wanted to pursue, and so I was there for not very long actually, and just simply because they identified not long after I joined that they had a runway issue, and so they couldn't actually chase this opportunity of growth without fixing that runway opportunity. And so I was going to have to sit on my hands for another 2 years, which I didn't find all that exciting. So I was recruited very quickly by Darwin Airport and Northern Territory airports because they were keen to continue down a growth path they had, although they had significant issues with a capital program that had been ongoing in that region, which supported a lot of traffic. And so I joined them for a few years just prior to the pandemic, and then in 2019 joined a consultancy, and that's where I spent the last 6 years. And that gave me, again, a lot of exposure to different markets. And so over the pandemic, which wasn't particularly kind on consultants in the aviation sector at the time, I survived. It did, again, provide me with an opportunity to interact with a lot of different global stakeholders. And I did get involved in the Pacific, actually, and, how their recovery would be mapped out. And so that was work that I did at the time, then applying for this role in joining this company. And that's something that, I guess they looked at my pedigree and thought, first of all, I need to tick a few boxes, and that is, I have to be willing to live here. And so I am living here in Honiara, which has given me an opportunity to see a country that I might have eventually seen, but have now begun to experience and thoroughly do enjoy the people. They call it the Happy Isles, and they are a happy bunch of people. And they do aspire to lifting their living standards. And I'm just over 100 days now. I think it might be 130. The first 100 days that of a CEO, you try and map out for the team, where I think the company should go with the blessing of the board. And that has been upended with, the fuel crisis. The fuel crisis really did overshadow the first 100 days, that's for sure.
Awesome experience there, and especially from the airport side. As someone who's very, very peripheral to the aviation industry, it strikes me that it must be kind of one of those sort of frenemy situations, right, between airports and airlines. What is that dynamic like, and what would you say is easier, running an airport or running an airline?
I actually have sworn to people that I would never work for an airline, and here I am. Because, the challenges for an airline are significant. And, what we've cleverly done in the airline industry is we've made it really easy for people to travel. And, of course, making it easy means you remove barriers, right? It is literally like getting on a bus or a train or a taxi for us now, right? But to achieve that, though, is incredibly difficult. The challenges that I've now discovered as a CEO of an airline are just enormous. It is a bit like an orchestra. You're just, tweaking things now and then to sort of make it absolutely perfect. But now that I'm in the role, what I often find is that airports sometimes make decisions or are forced to make decisions that actually constrain growth and limit opportunities. And they make these decisions with all good intent, but don't understand the unintended consequences of those decisions. Investing in capital infrastructure, whilst necessary, also is a double-edged sword, because once it's invested, the investor, generally airports themselves, want a return on that. And so getting a return on that requires passengers ultimately to pay for it. Now, if the passenger base isn't growing, or it's stagnant, or in fact declining, that expense starts to rack up pretty quickly. So the lower unit costs, in other words, lack of passengers, means that the existing passenger volume you've got there has to cover a higher cost. And so people walk through a terminal and say, "Oh, this is lovely." You're paying for that.
Yeah.
In this environment here, I have had a couple of people saying, "I would love to invest in an airport terminal here or there or wherever it might be." And I said, "Well, as soon as it happens, your airfare is going to go up by twice." And they sort of are
Right.
shocked by that. And I say, "Well, how's that going to be paid for?" And
Yeah.
so, and then another sort of really simple example is that there's a small airfield that we fly to. Someone was saying recently, we need someone to invest in a flushing toilet. It's going to cost you 100 Australian dollars each time to use it because the volume's going to be so small that it's not going to warrant investment. And
Yeah.
so that's the sort of conversation. And once you explain that, people sort of get it. They say, "Oh
Yeah.
yeah, okay, let's not bother with the bathroom."
It's an interesting line of discussion, Matt, because it's, I know when I grew up, international travel or airline travel, even domestically actually, was seen as a genuine luxury. Whereas, what you're talking about in terms of how it's been made easier and easier and easier, it became an expectation that we had. And I just now look at the pricing of airfares because of things like the fuel crisis, but I guess also the things you're talking about in terms of continual investment is, it's starting to me to look like it's becoming a luxury again.
Yes. Look, Glenn, you've really hit the nail on the head there, because it is a thought that's crossed my mind in the sense of, being freely available to the masses in some markets. That may not be the case for everyone going forward because, post-COVID, the supply chains and the cost of actually investing in parts and building aircraft has just become incredibly difficult. And, the cost spread across smaller volume of seats or smaller aircraft is really where the challenge is. The Australian government bailed out Rex, for instance. Now, this
That's right.
airline
Yeah.
was listed on the stock exchange until before COVID,
Yeah.
and has a massive fleet, but half their fleet's now parked for parts, or they can't get parts, and the rest are flying. In the Pacific, for instance, there's still this thinking that, oh, it should be easy. Well, if it's hard for New Zealand and it's hard for carriers in Australia, mark my word, it's hard for carriers in the Pacific.
Yeah.
And in my other sort of comments to media and other organizations, partners become important. And so
Um,
purposeful partnerships is something that I've been talking to a lot of my stakeholders about, that we need to sort of spend time in developing.
yeah.
Matt,
And
maybe you're having to tick two boxes. You've got both an international element to your business. I presume that's where a lot of the kind of revenue might be generated, but you've also got a domestic obligation, I suppose, to supply and to provide that connectivity within the country. And a place like Solomon Islands, I mean, for the benefit of our listeners, we're talking, there's sort of 700 individual islands, 39, I think. Yeah, 1,000 islands, dozens of airports or airfields, a population of about 700,000 plus spread across that. So quite a large population by Pacific standards. How does that work sort of strategically and commercially for your business?
There's 1,000 islands here. Vanuatu has something like 84. And the Solomons is the third most populous country in the Pacific. Number one is PNG. Number two is Fiji. And then, of course, we're third. So roughly speaking, about 150,000 residents. And so they're spread across these 1,000 islands. Tourism really is in its infancy here in this nation. Most people probably listening will probably be looking at the map saying, where is the Solomons? And so, putting us on the map literally is a task of ours, right? And so we do serve our nation domestically because getting urgent supplies of medicals, equipment and stocks. The central bank even commented to me that I play an important role in running an airline because they can get cash around the country. That's exactly what happens with an airline. And most airlines around the world will carry cash and high value gems and that sort of thing because one, it's very safe, and number two, it's efficient. We do offer these domestic flights. Some of them are loss making just simply because there isn't the volume of passengers, but we serve them and with the support of government. So there is a payment that comes to us called a community service obligation payment. Now that varies every year depending on different costs and other sort of aspects, but that is a central part of ensuring that we can continue to function and provide that service. The costs that we are incurring are often incurred in either Australian or US dollars. And of course, in those economies, wages continue to rise. And so therefore, the cost of supplying us with those parts in US dollars or Australian dollars often comes with wage inflation of those nations. And so our supply of parts as a cost continues to rise. And so then people wonder why our airfares are rising. Well, that's because the costs that we're incurring and running an airline are often imported costs, not our own.
Right.
If you look at where airlines are adding more seats and flights, it's often internationally, because that's where the growth in the industry really is at the moment.
You mentioned the small size of Solomon's tourism industry, and my understanding is that it is very small. It's kind of in the sort of 30,000 tourist numbers, to put that in context. Cook Islands is getting close to 200,000, Fiji's getting close to 1 million. So I know you've done a bit of work into other markets like Vanuatu and some of those international routes. More plans around that sort of area and utilising that kind of jet capability that you've got within the fleet?
Yeah, look, so tourism really is in its infancy here, but has massive potential. The World War II aspect, the Battle of Guadalcanal, of course, was the turning point for the US Defense Forces in the Pacific. And so there's a lot of connection here with both the US and Japanese. As a result of what was left behind, there's massive scuba and snorkeling that's here that's just outstanding. I've had divers tell me that it's one of the best places in the world to go scuba diving, just with the diversity of marine life. Those 50 plus are traveling far more than those that are younger. So the history here and the opportunity to experience some of these places that are really unique. There's the jungle, of course, the aspect of the mountainous regions, and of course the sea is a massive attraction. So we do have those tourism assets. It's just a matter of putting them to work. And so whilst the first 100 days has been shrouded in challenges with fuel, the focus has turned towards how do we create an industry that really is here in its infancy but needs to be further enhanced. And so I have been vocal in saying we need international brands to take an active interest here. So what we are finding is that people that do come here, they do come back because they have such an amazing experience. And of course, they want to experience more of it. And as I mentioned, international brands are a part of that. And so we need, for instance, a Hilton or a Sheraton or a Core. We just don't have those names here, so we're not on people's radar. And so we need to have these purposeful partners that can work with us to develop ourselves as a nation, as a visitor economy. And so code shares and interline relationships that allow people to have seamless travel options from Europe or North America or Australia, New Zealand, wherever it might be, that is really important to us.
When I first went to Honiara, just the presence of that recent history is so incredible. The topography is amazing. The airfield itself is the sort of the scene of so much of that, strategic conflict and everything. But then, as you say, just the natural beauty in the water and the surrounds is really something to see. And that's just in the capital city, let alone in those 1,000 other islands that you can get out to and see as well. I'm sure many of our listeners, if they haven't been to Solomon Islands, very happy to give that an advertorial and make sure you get over there. If you're thinking about other airlines in the region, they can be collaborators as well as competitors. And what is that dynamic like across the region?
We do have partnerships with a range of carriers already. So Fiji Airways a partner of ours, Air New Guinea's a partner. We have existing relationships with the likes of Qantas that we're in discussions with, as well as others like Air New Zealand and Virgin and other carriers that are in the Pacific. We are focused on these partnerships simply because we want to be able to have more people come and visit the Solomon. These purposeful partnerships become crucial, especially in a market where internationally airlines need to grow. And so we see ourselves offering a service to niche markets that are unserved. Often you land in a place like a capital city or a major metropolitan area. You don't often spend more time there than elsewhere around the country. Auckland's a good example, right? You might land in Auckland, you might spend 1 or 2 days, but you'll spend another 8 days traveling around the North or South Island, for instance. And so that's sort of what happens here, right? You land in Honiara and then you go elsewhere. And so getting people here is really crucial. So partners like Fiji Airways, Air Niugini, etc., become really important for us. Our largest visitor market for all purposes of travel is Australia. Our second largest visitor market is China. And a lot of that traffic comes via Port Moresby because you don't need a transit visa. Australia need a transit visa.
Well, I saw something just on that. I saw an article the other day saying that with the removal of that transit visa for Chinese tourists in Auckland, that it's added something like another $230 million worth of economic value in the time since it's been removed.
That's right.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
it was a very smart move by New Zealand to approve those visitors that had got the visa for Australia to onward travel to New Zealand. I think it was very smart.
Yeah. Hey, just listening to you, Matt, it strikes me that one of the big challenges that you have is stakeholder management. It's an incredibly complex stakeholder map that you have, all with a strong vested interest in what you're doing and what your success is. How have you found that in the 110, 120 days that you've been in the job? Have you got your head around that yet?
Yeah, look, I think it's going to be a constant challenge, communication. There is a huge number of stakeholders that take an interest in the airline. And of course, because people have travelled in the past and travel regularly, they think they know how to run an airline, which I find really amusing. And so I'm often offered advice, which is really interesting, which is gold. I enjoy hearing what people are saying because quite often they simply have no idea, and it's just more entertainment for my own benefit. But there are stakeholders that are really well informed, and so listening to them and hearing their concerns is really important. And I do spend a lot of time communicating with stakeholders. I deliberately talk with my staff regularly. I have what we call a talk every month, where I go sit in a clubhouse outside our offices in Henderson. One thing that I'm really focused on is ensuring that I hear people and people feel like they've been heard. There's very few that I come across that want to see us fail, but success is hard won.
We are talking to Matthew Finlay, the CEO of Solomon Airlines, and it's been a fantastic Talanoa today, or I suppose we should say a story, to use the Solomon Island language. And thinking about our own audience, business people from across Australia, New Zealand, and around the Pacific region and further afield as well. If they may not have heard of Solomon Airlines or may not have heard of Solomon Islands, even, what would your sort of headline takeaway be for those people listening in about what it is that you do and what you'd like to be doing over the next few months?
What I'm really focused on is ensuring our continued operation for the benefit of the nation. And sometimes that means serving markets internationally, for instance, at the moment, outside of our nation, simply because we need to keep our jets busy. As I keep saying to my colleagues in the company, engines turning, we're earning. Our volume of flying continues to climb. Otherwise, we need to make other choices. And this is why we are the largest foreign carrier in Vanuatu. And we're working very closely with Air Vanuatu, and we see them as a natural partner for us, not only because of our Melanesian culture, but because of the fact that they're neighbours, and they need the help of an international carrier that supplants what they've lost, unfortunately. And so we are now the largest international carrier by seat volume in and out of Vanuatu, because we'll start this week services to Christchurch. We'll start with 1 a week and then lift it to 2. We'll also start in the following week services to Port Moresby. Now, I've already mentioned Port Moresby as a hub for Chinese traffic, and we have a relationship with China Southern, which has now just been switched on in the last 7 days.
Anyone listening in from Christchurch who might be thinking about traveling to Vanuatu, and perhaps then from there on to Solomon Islands with Solomon Airlines, I think. To your point also about the opportunities in Solomon Islands tourism, probably also worth noting that I think there's a recruitment process underway for the new head of the Solomon Islands Visitors Bureau, so the tourism organisation within Solomon Islands. And as you've said, Matt, today, that's growing that tourism economy is just going to be so critical, not just for your business, but certainly for the economic fortunes of the country as a whole. We've been talking today to Matthew Finlay, the CEO of Solomon Airlines, one of the larger airlines operating across the Pacific. Matthew, it's been a whirlwind, 130 days. It's pleased to see you're still smiling. Thank you to us. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you, and kia ora to everyone who's listening in New Zealand, and g'day to those in Australia. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I'm excited because of the massive challenge, but opportunity that you have there to build something pretty special that's going to really benefit the Solomon Islands economy.
Some people have said, why did you take this role? And look, there's two elements. One is I was keen on the adventure, so to speak. And the other element is, I think I can make a difference. And so that's what's really, driven me to take on the role.
Oh, best of luck with that challenge, and I'm sure you'll be super successful. So Dave, 140 days into his role, and gosh, what a challenge he's got. But I guess you got to look at that background of, even though he fell into it accidentally, massive experience in the aviation sector, thanks to the Yellow Pages. What a challenge in terms of trying to get a return on investment from an airline like that while you're still servicing the population, doing what you've got to do in terms of servicing 1,000 islands or as close as possible, as well as providing a return for government.
Well, firstly, for me, I think it's great that he's finally made it out of the A section of the directory, and he's made it all the way down to S now. So well done, Matt. You've worked your way down through the alphabet to get to Solomon Airlines now. As we touched on in the Talanoa, there's that natural frenemy type tension between airports and airlines, right? To have him come from such a deeper level of experience internationally around, operating airports, working with airlines from that other side of the ledger, I think that's got to be quite important, and some really, really interesting insights that I wouldn't have thought intuitively would make sense. Like, that point that he made about, investing in further airport capability is actually not necessarily going to be helpful for an airline, because that's just going to increase the cost base and the need to recoup some of that investment through higher priced airfares. That links in with the broader tourism strategy and all of these other kind of policy objectives that an airline needs to assist with. And it just took me back to that comment that Sir Ewan Smith made about the haves and the have-nots across the Pacific. And the haves are the countries that have a thriving tourism industry, and the have-nots are those that don't. As Matthew said, and I really loved his optimism, there is such phenomenal potential in Solomon Islands tourism. Huge challenges, huge barriers, a lot of infrastructure need. But ultimately, there is an incredible product there waiting to be experienced. It was just fantastic to have him on the show.
Engines turning, we're earning.
That was a great line, wasn't it?
That was the one. Hey, and of course, Dave, closely related to that, we are, as we sort of see the light at the end of the tunnel for one crisis, i.e. the fuel crisis, and I know Tonga's prices are already coming down, but we start to confront another one, which is a more natural disaster or potential disaster, which is the El Nino impact. Everybody's sort of turning now from monitoring it to actually getting prepared for the impact of it across the region. So, hopefully it's not as bad as people are predicting, but it does sound like people are taking it very seriously and sort of battening down the hatches in the ways that they need to prepare for it.
Preparing for it insofar as anyone can. It is obviously something that takes a long time to play through, and its effects have all sorts of different permutations in different parts of the region, right? So I remember someone saying it's completely different north versus south. So even in a place like Cook Islands, which is a smallish country, but a very, very large area that it covers, the impacts of an El Nino up in the northern group are very, very different, dramatically different to the impacts in the south. And then east-west across the region as well, there's all of those different impacts too. So places like Papua New Guinea, which are closer up to the equator, probably northern parts of Solomon Islands, and certainly the North Pacific, really is also going to have traditionally those issues with limited water availability. And then down south, including places like New Zealand, where get set for more rain. So it just goes to that point about the Pacific being a very resilient place and needing to constantly deal with this raft of issues.
Well, you mentioned Papua New Guinea, Dave, and I do see that they're on the basis of their past experience with El Nino, they're one of the countries that's really taking preparedness very seriously. But you also mentioned before we started recording that there's a bit going on in Papua New Guinea this week.
This week there have been a couple of big announcements that I think are worth highlighting. An updated economic statement about the impact of the high gold prices, and of course Papua New Guinea being a major minerals exporter has benefited immensely from reasonably high prices for commodities like gold, and so that's been a very useful addition to the budget over there. But also a big announcement this week that the government is going to be redeveloping Jackson's airfield in Port Moresby, which of course is the main international gateway into Papua New Guinea, and that's sort of being looked at in advance of Papua New Guinea next hosting APEC, which I think is scheduled for 2033. Back to that point that Matthew made about Papua New Guinea actually being an important entry point into even Solomon Islands. It is a very critical piece of infrastructure for the Western Pacific region.
Yeah, and more commentary on the Fiji budget this week.
Fiji, it really is that kind of epicenter of commercial activity, not just on this show, but of course across the region. What happens economically in Fiji does matter. I think the most talked about metric has been this new 5% levy on large tourism operators. Those earning above $2 million in revenue are going to be faced with an additional 5% tax or levy. It's going to be imposed for another 12 months, and the proceeds are ring-fenced to support Fiji Airways. It's not to say it's not controversial, though. There's certainly been some criticism from the tourism industry, just pointing out that they weren't really consulted on the measure, and I think a lot of people just assuming that cost will be passed on to tourists.
And for something completely different, the big fisheries meeting in Wellington this week.
It's one of those areas that a lot of media probably doesn't give enough coverage to, is that fisheries industry in the region. Fish stocks are things that move between borders, and so it really is important, I think, that there are coordinated approaches to managing them. Most of the actual fishing fleets in the region are not domestically owned by Pacific Island countries. So, there's a lot of foreign operators there that move, between open seas and EEZs. You've got the Forum Fisheries Agency up in Honiara, which has some quite sophisticated technology and support that it provides to Pacific countries. And so just having that regional coordination on what is a really, really deeply important resource, I think is key. And so it was great to see those Pacific ministers getting together in Wellington this week to talk through some of the implications.
And I don't know whether it was timed to be alongside that, but there was a bit of announcement in the media in New Zealand this week about Te Rakihi stocks depleting. And, a bit of argument back and forth with the industry, sort of saying, no, we're looking after it really well. And others saying, well, yeah, but they're going away.
New Zealand's had always quite an innovative approach to our quota management system, the allocation of quota stocks, the tradability of those stocks as well, which kind of creates a bit of a free market in terms of how you, as a business, can securitize and monetize your access to particular fishing quota. And I know that's something that's been looked at a little bit across the region.
And the other thing we picked up this week, Dave, was that innovation forum in Port Vila. Looked like some entrepreneurs pitching their businesses up. I think you mentioned that some people that we know were as part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't heard the results yet. The pitches were all happening yesterday, but our good friends from Kahuto Pacific, Janina and Chris, were up in Port Vila this week, and so shout out to them. No, it's always sort of a stressful time, getting up in front of your Shark Tank or your Dragon's Den or whatever it was that they had there to pitch your ideas. Fantastic to see innovation being celebrated in a place like Vanuatu, having a succession of different businesses. I think there were 5 that had made it through to the finals of that pitching competition. And so, Kahuto itself, as we know, is a very innovative business with its use of large-scale data for infrastructure work. So really cool to see that innovation being kind of incubated and celebrated across the Pacific region.
Dave, and before I let you go and watch the Australians beat the Egyptians, hopefully, cross fingers, what else have you got that you've spotted that's coming up this week?
The big day that's happening in Cook Islands today is the Uiariki Day. So that's a celebration of the chiefly structure here in Cook Islands. And then I think, the next big event that I'll be going to is, of course, the Matariki function on the 10th of July, next Friday, which also coincides with my own birthday. So what better way to celebrate than heading along to the New Zealand High Commission to catch up with everyone there.
Very important, and very good to hear that the High Commissioner is throwing a birthday party for you. I'm sure you'll take it that way.
It's very good of her, I know. Yeah.
Well, on that note, Dave, would you like to read us out? Because I think the game's just gone into extra time. So if you read us out quickly, you can go and catch the final score.
We've had a huge number of, really, really insightful and impressive guests, and there are plenty more to come. The best part of it, of course, is the engagement that we get with those of you listening in or watching us online. Of course, you can listen in on any of your favourite podcast channels, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or you've actually just uploaded us now to iHeartRadio, so we're on that channel now as well, and of course in full colour on YouTube. You can get in touch with us through any of the channels, whether it's LinkedIn is our main one, but of course all of the others, the Vibers, the Messengers, the LinkedIn DMs. We're always open to feedback, and of course we have our dedicated email address, to.palagi, Palagi @gmail.com. Please keep the feedback coming. Please keep the engagement high. Tell your friends. Feel free to subscribe and share it far and wide, and we will be back next week. But for now, this is Tu Palagi in a Pisanisi pod for the week ending 4th of July.